Ivan, we're going to start with the question that's on everybody's mind, if you have any understanding of society or economics or so on, which is a potential huge change at the next general election. Who's going to win the next general election, as you know, based on polls at the moment, and why, and what will the shape of the likely coalition be?
Okay, well, I wouldn't be alone in saying that the clear winner, whether it's the end of 24 or early 25, on all known information, is going to be Sinn Féin. And let me just explain to you why that is the case. First of all, in the 2020 election, and we've had no election other than the Dublin South Central by-election for Ivana Bacek between then and June of 2024. It's a very long period for there to be no election, and therefore polls are of more significance. But if we start with the data, which is March 2020, February 2020, Sinn Féin got 24.5% of the vote. They left behind them 12 seats where they got enough votes, but their surpluses elected 12 TDs that would have been Sinn Féin TDs. So instead of their figure that they have at the moment, 36, it should be 48. The next thing that has to be said is that there is no poll has them as less than 30%, not the 24.5, and I've seen as high as 34%. So, and this is not just one poll, this is polls for more than 2 years. The second reason why I really believe it is the reason behind this, and that is the under 40s. And the situation is that the under 40s as an age cohort think completely differently to those over 55 for two reasons. One, the ESRI have produced figures to show that home ownership, some equity in your home, the first rung of the property ladder, has gone from 90% down to 60% between the 33 to 45 age group. They have no prospect outside the public sector of a defined benefit pension, even with auto-enrollment. And they're looking at being considerably worse off than their parents, and they are bitter and twisted about the boomer generation. And they are going to vote for change. They're going to vote for anti-establishment. So you and I, of our vintage, could speak to people who would say, no, I'm not going to have Sinn Féin, but you're not listening to the people who are actually going to decide this. So there is so much societal, numeric and other information out there that leads me to believe that Sinn Féin, on the redrawn constituencies, which means that the next door will have 14 more seats, it's enlarged, the magic figure is almost 90 of a majority. I cannot see any circumstances as long as Mary Lou is leading the party, because, you know, there were people who came out of the polling booths in 2020 and said, I'm not voting, Mary Lou isn't on my ballot paper here in Longford or Sligo or Wexford. She is the brand, the first female Taoiseach, and I presently would have them something around the 60 to 68 seat target, which of course is short of 90 seats, but it's going to be by far the largest party. I think the second largest party will be Fianna Fáil in the mid to high 30s. And I think Fine Gael have a particular problem, and it's one of my iron rules of politics. Except for China and except for Russia, nobody, Blair, Thatcher, Bertie, once you're more than 12, 13 years in power, people say, I don't care what you have to say about health, education, or housing. Mate, you've had a dozen or more years to do something. I want to change. And so therefore, I think it's set fair. And it's just a case of how big a market share they're going to get.
So what I'm hearing then is that it's like a big mood movement. In other words, it's not really based on policy and facts and so on. It's the why of Sinn Féin rather than the how of Sinn Féin is driving it.
Well, I think it's intergenerational. I really think it's intergenerational, and you see many manifestations of people who are very bitter, who feel dispossessed, who feel life isn't giving them a fair shake, and who were brought up in circumstances. You work hard, you get your own home, you have equity in that, and you get a decent pension. all those realistic life goals, rearing a family, are gone out the window. People are paying more than 50% of their income on rent. And the number one issue that has driven this change is housing.
Yeah. Well, when you look underneath that, then at the housing thing, which is an absolute crisis for the country. Let's face it. All of the arguments about what caused that post the global financial crisis and all the rest of it simply don't stand up. And isn't that the issue? And Sinn Féin know that. I mean, all of the talk about we're going to fix it and you're making some progress, it's all a bit late, isn't it? It's just too late. They're not going to do it. I mean, I can't see how a sentiment shift of the nature you've described.
That's why I'm so adamant about it. And also, there is a kind of a male pale and stale feel about the establishment parties. I think it's going to be even worse for the Greens. The smaller party always gets it in the neck, and I see them on social media described as Fruit Loops, even though people do accept the whole sustainability, climate change imperative. That's another intergenerational issue. The fact is, the have-nots are simply going to rebel, and they're not actually expecting that their life is going to change. It's motivated by resentment and even anger.
Well, can we just go forward then in a time machine to the day after the next general election? You're there with Mary Lou. You're just looking over her shoulder. She's looking at between 60 and 65 seats for Sinn Féin. She knows she has to get it over 90 to get some kind of a sustainable government. How does she do that?
I think that she will say the best thing to do is ensure the old parties, the establishment parties, all of which is really rhetorical, should not be in government. And then she will fail to put the fragmented left into a disciplined, cohesive unit, and Sinn Féin are a disciplined, cohesive unit from the top down. So I think they will be left with a situation that Fine Gael want to go into opposition. Simon Harris will be the new leader, and he would relish the opportunity of, from the opposition benches, ideologically and economically taking on a Sinn Féin administration. So I think you're going to find by a process of arithmetic, a process of Fianna Fáil feeling that the supply and confidence did not work. They did worse in 2020 than 2016. They're going to conclude they're better off in government, making decisions, and even house training Sinn Féin. And so therefore, they will say to their people, they will say to the business community, the farming community, to the property classes, we are going to be your anchor to put the restrainers on Sinn Féin. The other thing I would say to people is that...
So you're saying, you're quite clear on this, you're saying that you see Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil coalition there?
Yes, absolutely. I think, first of all, it will give a stable majority. I think, let's be clear, what are Sinn Féin? If you cut them, what do they bleed? And I think they bleed one thing, and that is to be in government north and south, and within 5 years to have a border poll. The thing that has motivated them all their adult lives is a vision of a united Ireland, a vision of a unitary state, and everything is subservient to that. And as long as Fianna Fáil sign up to a border poll within 5 years, I don't actually see an obstacle, because I think everything else is pragmatic and politics. But the other point I would make is this. I'm around long enough, over 40 years in these affairs, not to understand that the permanent government, the civil service, and Sean Cromeen, a former Secretary General of the department, a classic Sir Humphrey of the Department of Finance, said to me when I was appointed finance spokesperson, he brought me into a sitting room, lovely deep carpet, cup of tea, to get a briefing on the overall situation on his in-tray. And he said, Deputy Yates, before I say anything to you, can I just say this? It doesn't matter if a communist walks through that door. The advice will be the same, and the outcome will be pretty much the same. So the point I'm making is, don't rule out when Sinn Féin come with certain proposals, they will be told, well, go ahead, but that won't work. And I do think it'll be ameliorated. But it is a valid question, beyond the political punditry, what type of government will it be?
And you know the recent, just to go back slightly to the formation of the government, the recent increase in the number of seats really is going to have no material impact, basically, on your.
No, the situation is, on my specific arithmetic, there of the 14 extra seats, I could see Sinn Féin winning 14 of them, but they would have won seats in what would have been the old parliament. But let's be clear, uh, uh, everything going back to Tully's gerrymander in the 70s, with the Cosgrave government, every redraw does not materially affect the outcome of a PR-based multi-seat constituency election. It affects individuals, it affects the geography of what town gets TDs, but does it affect the dual arithmetic in terms of party strength? No.
Okay. And then, okay, so they're in government. Just going forward again a little bit further in time, they're in government with Fianna Fáil. Fianna Fáil is led by whom then? Because
Well, this is a really, the biggest imponderable I have between now and then is, and sorry, let's be clear, when you cut Fianna Fáil, what they bleed is aspirant blue collar working class to make them middle class. They're not, that reflects in pensioners. They have always been in that space, and they feel that Sinn Féin is eating their lunch. They feel they have more in common with Sinn Féin than they do with Fine Gael, who are essentially quite blue rinse, middle class, farming, and so on. So actually, a lot of Fianna Fáil TDs and senators, if you speak to them, would feel more comfortable with Sinn Féin than they would with Fine Gael. But that being said, Fine Gael are heading for the hills anyway. Retirements are going to decimate them and their performance in the election because, as the Labour Party found, once an individual TD, Brendan Griffin, Joe McHugh, Richard Bruton, not to speak of someone like Michael Ring or other people who may yet decide to go, John Paul Phelan, a lot of the vote is tied up in that individual, and it's very hard to do succession planning. So, what I see is imponderable. Is I thought it was very straightforward, Eddie. I thought what was going to happen was Fianna Fáil have the EU commissionership. The new EU Commission takes its seat after the European elections in June 2024, and I assumed that the perfect scenario and script would be that Micheál Martin would finalise his political career by going to Brussels, become a senior vice president of the Commission, get a decent sort of titular portfolio, and happy days. And Fianna Fáil would have an orderly succession. He's there since 2011. He has done his bit. He has saved Fianna Fáil from a near-death experience. He's been Taoiseach. Like, what more is there to do? But my sources, Eddie, human nature comes into this, tells me what he really wants is not to be commissioner, but to be president after Michael D. Higgins, which is in 2025. And the situation is, I think he feels if he goes to Brussels, he excludes that possibility. I don't know if that's true or not, because I don't see him being irrelevant, and I don't see him having any negativity. If he leads Fianna Fáil into a bad election, it may have negativity. In terms of the succession race, I think there are what I would say 2.5 candidates. The candidates are Michael McGrath, Dara O'Brien, and Jack Chambers, of which Jack Chambers could be part of a dream ticket with Michael McGrath, Dublin and Cork, age and experience and all of that. But what might happen is that Micheál Martin might say to McGrath to get him out of the way and for him to continue as leader, you go to Brussels. And I think he would go to Brussels if he was asked. So I've tried to lay it out for you that I don't know how it's going to work out. I do think that Fianna Fáil have to focus on succession. They just cannot go on. The person who has fought the last 3 elections for them, the next election, they are facing a tsunami, an intergenerational tsunami, and they have to respond to that by having some element of new DAS, extra improved, extra innovative, you know what I mean? You've got to rebrand Fianna Fáil other than your record in office. So put it like this, I'm still working on processing that data, Eddie, and haven't come to a final conclusion because there's a bit of human nature involved.
I think the big shift really is the big point that's been made. Like a lot of the other stuff is detail that a lot of people will just let wash by them, even though you and I find it fascinating, especially you because of your deep involvement in it over the years. But one of the things that I find interesting is that when you take your term, cut them, what do they bleed? If you look at Sinn Féin purely from an experience perspective, educational perspective, but most importantly, experience of running any kind of complex enterprise, there's nobody really on their front bench that actually has run any complex enterprise, and the educational weight of the front bench is very, very thin.
Well, there's two points I'd make about that. There is not a week goes by that I speak to some senior, because a lot. I work for the CIF, the IHF, and all these sectoral bodies in the arena of conferences and facilitation and listening to people. It never ceases to amaze me with each passing week how people tell me how impressed they are with the technocratic, professional chiefs of staff and cohorts of people that Sinn Féin have working for them. They know when a spokesperson is handed a brief, it is really well informed. And I would think it would be a huge mistake to underestimate their technical ability and the resources that they put in there. But let's make no mistake about it. Their appeal is not cerebral. Their appeal is we are of the people, for the people. It is very much. Louise O'Reilly is a very good case in point. Her dad was a SIP2 official, and she would have been a SIP2 official if she wasn't in politics. Your classic training ground for Labour, formerly Labour TDs and so on. They have completely eaten the Labour Party's lunch, and it's actually possible, believe it or not. The Labour Party, the oldest party in the state, could actually end up with no seat in the next Dáil.
I think that's the point I was actually, maybe I misstated the question. That's the point I was getting to. That the dearth of experience, which is being made up by being very well briefed, and I think Pierce Doherty is an absolute classic example of that. And I've said that to him directly. He's extraordinarily well on top of his brief, and he isn't the only one. But he is a standout because that's the area that I'm most interested in, finance. But I think it's the why of Sinn Féin is gathering in it's pulling it in towards them. The why of it, and the why is, as you would say, it's a generational change
and anti-establishment. They've never been in government in the south, and in fact, and I hear that there's a strong chance in the coming weeks that Michelle O'Neill will be First Minister. But there is no track record in the north that they've actually made a significant difference other than growing their party at every election.
Now, leaving aside all the other issues, if you just a question about Middle Ireland, if you just get into their objectives, their policy objectives, and I realise it's a moving feast because there'll be a programme for government and negotiations with Fianna Fáil, but sitting in the middle of it is this notion that wealth in Ireland begins at €1 million, including 80% of the value of your home, and you're going to pay 10% of all your wealth into two successive Sinn Féin governments if they were to get an 8 or 10 year run at it. So I mean that to most people in Middle Ireland is extraordinary, because it means every asset that you have, including 80% of your home, bar some exceptions, is totted up every year, and you pay 1% of that after paying all your other taxes into the exchequer.
Yes.
Do you see that holding?
Well, I put it like this. I actually don't know, but what I can see is that anyone who has capital assets and may have a low income, agriculture, residential property, commercial property is going through a bit of a downturn at the moment. How many shops in rural Ireland are closed with to let signs? But on paper, they have a very valuable asset. So I see enormous problems. But put it like this, I mean, I cannot make economic sense or even administrative sense of some of their, because one of the things is to abolish a really good earning tax, which is the local property tax. They promised to abolish it. I mean, whatever they get out of a wealth tax will be a fraction of what the revenue already collecting in a pretty without a rebellion, there's good compliance on the LPT. So I think that's daft. I think that employers' PRSI will go up. I think that they will be very negative towards the banks. I think the bank levy will go up. I think there'll be against corporations, insurance, and things like that. So I think what you're going to see is visibility of a them and us. And they're going to see to be quite against elites. They're going to be against big business. But I think this is how much of it is optical and how much of it is real. But there is no doubt. There is no doubt that if you're a landlord, right, and 200 like Marion Finnegan of Sherry Fitzgerald has calculated over the last 6 years, 220,000 units, residential units, are no longer available to let. And you know what? They are people who are thinking like you're thinking. What does a Sinn Féin government mean? And what it means is an eviction ban and a rent freeze. And you know what? I won't be able to manage my residential property asset. So certainly, I think the business community needs to start paying attention to politics because they can afford to have ignored it for the last 4 years. They can't afford to ignore it for the next 2 years because what's coming down the track is significantly different and will affect their business, whether you're an employer, whether you're FDI. But I do see the core things like 15% CPT staying. And of course, the other great advantage, because if I was to sum up what Sinn Féin will be, it will be spend and spend and spend and tax and spend and spend and spend. And, there is no doubt about it. For capital expenditure, for housing expenditure, for health and education expenditure, they are really fortunate. They are going to go into an exchequer that is full of a war chest of the proceeds of this huge continuing windfall of corporation profits tax.
Yeah, but just to focus on a couple of points you made there in that reply, when you look at what you're saying is they're going to target the banks, they'll target business, they'll target the insurance companies. It'll make them uncomfortable. Therefore, the point is that at the end of the day, FDI is made up of human beings coming into Ireland from outside, from Americans and so on, as well as the domestic managerial class coming through, and with their shares in the businesses as they get them and their value of their property. I mean, a sustained kind of ideological led taxation platform, big switch to that. What kind of impact do you think that will have on Ireland as being a beacon for foreign direct investment?
Well, I actually think because of the structure and nature of IP, that actually the windfall from CPT, which IFAC, the Financial Fiscal Advisory Service, I actually, from my corporate connections, tell me this is actually going to last well into the 20s, that this is it's not something that can disappear. And if they're fixed on the 15% rate, my understanding is the government and Apple are going to win the tax case against the EU and that will all settle down. However, there is another factor, which is this. I speak to people who have worked for the last 30, 40 years and they're at the end of their working life. And they keep mentioning Portugal to me. And Portugal is about not even living there, but having a residence or a lease or a property interest there that can allow you to take all your money out and all your earnings out entirely tax-free. And if the dogs in the streets that I'm inhabiting is telling me that, it won't be long before people avail of their EU entitlements. And I do see an exodus of some of the people who have a lot of the baggage issues with Sinn Féin about the North and the Troubles and all that. And I certainly think that there will be a reaction amongst the older generation who are being got at by this whole process.
So, I mean, that would be a people and capital flight of the grey birds, let's call them that. That's the Portuguese non-habitual residence scheme. And it's not the only one in the EU. Malta has a scheme as well, incidentally.
And the weather is probably better.
Yeah, but like when you go past the tipping point in taxation, you get capital and talent flight. I mean, that's the point. Whether it's FDI or the grey birds, that's going to be there. But that won't stop. Maybe two different. Put it to you. Would it stop? Because I don't see how it could. Two successive Sinn Féin led coalitions
implementing policies that ultimately could be quite harmful to the social economy. Yeah, as you know, the way we talk about command economies, I do see Sinn Féin as a command party. In other words, it has a coherent strategy, and you're absolutely right. Everything I'm hearing is predicated on it being, like Tony Blair, a 10-year process. And they are definitely looking at transforming and equalising Irish society. And let's be clear about it, Eddie. There are a lot of grounds for believing that as time has gone by, and I mean this in terms of the super rich, that Ireland has become a more unequal society. If you take something that you would be very knowledgeable about and observant and talking about, is interest rates. For interest rates, if you have money, if you are older, you want them to go up. You know what I mean? You want to get a return on your capital. If you're, a hard-pressed mortgage holder, you don't want it. And that is a classic example of Sinn Féin will always speak to that younger generation. Whereas maybe, Fianna Fáil Minister of Finance in the round will see, both sides of the argument and so on. So their project is very much based on cannibalizing the left. They do not want to be outflanked on the left. They want to cannibalize, those 12 TDs I spoke about, they were all left-wing TDs. And sort of Soc Dems, Labour, Greens, and so on. And part of their plan is to cannibalize that so that they actually, like in Greece at one point, they hoover up the left and they control it. And so they will never want to be outflanked on the left.
But what I'm getting from you then, not to put words in your mouth, is that if you brought it out slightly and you look at the experience of Italy and Greece, when kind of very left ideologically led parties got in power, they got pretty well turfed out pretty quickly by credit markets because they priced against their bonds, and by Brussels. They locked horns with Brussels, never a good idea, and came off, and they're almost gone off the political landscapes now. I don't think Sinn Féin, based on what you're saying, are silly enough to make that kind of.
That speaks to the other factor, which I think does bear some analysis. It's a political point, and that is, I think since Brexit, and there's something about the way young people support Irish teams, and the Wolf Tones and the Up the Ra and whatever. There is certainly, since the 1998 Belfast Agreement, since the cessation of violence on the industrial scale it was previously, with all the horrors of that, there is no living memory of young people of violence. And I honestly believe that, coupled with Brexit and a kind of, the centenary of 1916 and all of that and the way it was commemorated, I definitely think the younger generation, even the middle class, are a lot greener than their parents. And I don't mean that in the environmental sense. I mean it in the Republican sense. And I think that will become their core mission for their second term. You know what I mean? Sometimes you pivot, the job is half done. They will try and use that because it's authentic. It's what they really care about. It's part of their DNA, and it has been for their entire last existence, in modernization over the last decade or so. So what I'm saying is that one of the things, it's not all about the economy in terms of votes, and I do think they will connect with people who haven't thought through the consequences of United Ireland, the consequences of how Southern society would have to change, how we're going to pay for the North, all of these things. People don't want to know that. They want to press ahead with that agenda, and they want their politicians to do the same. And in that regard, both in terms of Fianna Fáil's perspective of dealing with Sinn Féin and with, Micheál Martin's emphasis on uniting people before united territory, it's all very sensible. I actually think it will require a new Fianna Fáil leader to make all that sustainable.
And then when you just when you look at that together, then if you look at the policy manifestos of the main parties, including Sinn Féin, they're entirely silent on any kind of wholesale reform of the effectiveness and and performance of the public sector. I mean, the National Children's Hospital is a standout, and yet people don't seem to be drawing a connection between that and the idea that the state can build all these houses.
Let's be clear. Since corporation tax went from 5 billion to 25 billion, any we'll say, Colin McCarthy-esque board snip ideology, value for money. Like I even find when I'm, interviewing people and asking questions, and I write down my notes, say I'm talking to someone from Teagasc or Tusla or something like that, and like I put VFM, value for money, and it actually doesn't feature. There's buckets of money around, and there is no hot breath on the back of the neck anywhere in government, regardless of who the political masters are for that. And it is a tragedy because, you know what? The one certainty, and I suppose where I'm leading to all this, when I'm taking all your rationale and all your cerebral points of this mightn't work out great for Ireland. There's a saying, events, dear boy. There's another saying with one, cycles, dear boy. Everything in politics is a cycle. Because whoever is threatening the incumbent in any jurisdiction, the one thing you're going to promise is change. And eventually you have so much incremental change, you come back to where you start. So I'm sufficiently cynical and long enough around to know that there will be an end to a decade of Sinn Féin, and it will actually be a mirror image of what you said has happened on the continent.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. But it's analogous, I think, is it not, to the Irish soccer team? I mean, you can have a very good manager, but if you don't have the players, you won't get the results. I mean, until and unless there is a complete reform of creating a meritocracy inside in the public sector, Sinn Féin or anybody else won't be able to deliver on the target.
The one thing I would caveat about that, other than my general point about cycles, is technology is going to change everything. I mean, we live in an era whereby the pace of AI and what it can do to mundane administration, I don't think it's beyond the wit of the software, cloud, tech sector to sell products and services to governments that are going to displace people and that you won't have people replaced. I actually think that the whole of society, the whole of public services, I see it because I do a lot of work in the health sector, and there are now 300,000 apps, and a lot of them are wearables and preventables and so on. What can be done to appointment systems, taking paper out of the health service, is revolutionary, absolutely revolutionary, and it's a lot more efficient, and it has better patient outcomes. So one thing I would just say about what I think will drive reform of the public sector is not a political will or leadership. It'll actually come through technology.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. I have a son, my oldest lad, and he's now living in Finland with his Finnish girlfriend. They moved out of Dublin because they couldn't afford it, and they're two very qualified people. Just Dublin was broken as far as they were concerned. Had a small injury recently from sports over in Western Finland and went into the local hospital. There was no paperwork at all. Everybody was going around on iPads, and there was robots going up and down the corridor. So and now in that society they pay extra, which I have no problem doing. They pour it into they get the fantastic education system, great health system, home care, childcare, all that done and dusted. But you pay for it. You pay an extra 19% on top of the type of taxes we pay. But people are quite happy to pay for it, to get it.
But some of this technology, the Scandinavian and Nordic countries are world leaders in this, Denmark as well, and so on. And they're always, I introduce international speakers, and they're of this. But when I'm training all of these trends, it's like the fax machine is gone. The phone has replaced your camera. It's replaced your radio. It's going to replace your newspaper. It's going to replace everything. So the fact of the matter is, all these technological changes are irreversible.
Perhaps, but I just don't see AI and robotics building the houses at the level that is expected.
Can I tell you this, because I'm in the middle of all that. There's a thing called MMC, Modern Methods of Construction, BIM, and off-site production, where you can actually build a house in 3 days, assemble it in 3 days. All of these changes will bring game-changing differences to housing. But can I tell you this? If I was to say, what is the biggest problem in Ireland today, and our capacity restraints in housing in some area, we have a planning emergency in this country. We've decided we need to get from 34% to 80% of renewable energy. And everyone says, yeah. One Pinola, in the last 12 months, haven't granted permission for one wind farm. and I'm not talking about offshore, I'm talking about onshore. We have a systemically dysfunctional organisation in terms of Borplanola. Our planning processes are an international joke. And when I talk to senior people in semi-states, in government, in the public sector, and I say, this is the biggest problem that's holding the country back because of the lag time, you know what they say? Well, of course, the planning process is a statutory independent process. And I actually think if Sinn Féin can fix that and get planning moving, they will have done the country some service.
Yeah, I agree, but that's the point about making up the dirt on housing. It's not the construction technology that's there. It's all the other stuff around it, especially the planning process. Remember, involved in a book about all of this some years ago. Where a senior barrister writing in the book was advocating for a planning court, bring everybody together in one hearing, just get it done. But we haven't made any progress.
No, it's got much worse. It's got much worse, Eddie. There's layers and layers, and I could bore you to tears with it, but that is, and if Leo is writing a book in 4 years' time, and he says, I was 14 years in office from 2011 to 2015, 2025, where did it all go wrong? You didn't listen to the people who said the housing crisis was a planning emergency, and you didn't deal with it.
Yeah. And so in summary then, Ivan, right, it just looks as if the why of Sinn Féin is far more powerful than the how, how they're going to do these things and what their experience will be, etc. And that it's more or less baked into the cake now. Fianna Fáil will be their coalition partners. And you say events, dear boy, could interfere. Putting on your forecast, your blue sky, think what kind of events could possibly arise.
If anything happened to Mary Lou. If Mary Lou was to get seriously ill, God forbid, that would be a game changer, notwithstanding what you said about Pierce Doherty. But still, the train is leaving the station. I don't think there's anything Fine Gael can do. I do think the Fianna Fáil leadership question is actually the most curious and the most fascinating in terms of the permutations of what might happen with coalition, whether Fianna Fáil get over 35 seats or under 35 seats, and how they're fixed on the whole border poll. These are going to be the final parts of the Sinn Féin jigsaw to me, because I do see a serious rump of the middle classes, the property classes, the farming community, and those over 55 who will no day, no way vote for Sinn Féin. Pensioners, yes, but those people who have skin in the game won't. And that is sufficient. So people are telling me, if Sinn Féin, if Fianna Fáil get 26 seats, if Fianna Gael get 26 seats, which people, they got 75 seats not so long ago, which they think is a way, way below what their minimum will be. Fianna Fáil basically go down or go up. That gets quite close to 60. And people are saying, well, throw in your Greens and so on. I think that analysis is wrong. I think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's interests either are going to merge or they no longer coincide in the short term. And therefore, I actually think that Fine Gael have made up their mind they're going into opposition. I think Leo, Pascal, and Simon Coveney are already planning their next careers, and it's not inside Leinster House. And therefore, the people who I speak to who will be around for the long, miserable, rubber chicken circuit in opposition, they all tell me that they see the best growth prospect with Sinn Féin in power for 5+ years, with them becoming the largest party again afterwards.
Well, if you look at the timing of the next Irish general election, it's happening at a time when there's momentous elections throughout Europe, and there's a lot of shifting ground. I'm sure you're watching it from afar, including the growth of the AfD in Germany, Alliance for Germany. So that seems to be growing. We've seen it in Italy. What do you see happening there? Do you see the EU substantially changing?
I think most of the focus is who's going to get the top jobs after June 24 in terms of the European People's Party, the Free Democrats, the Alliance and Liberals, and and the socialists and so on. That anyone I speak to in Europe is talking about that, typical Europe, the split up of the who'll be president of the council, who Esther van der Leyen's job, and all those jobs, and so on. And that's to do with the European elections. But I will say this: I do think there will be a change of government in Britain. And I do think Keir Starmer will be Prime Minister. And I do think there will be a serious effort to change Britain's relationship post-Brexit with the EU. And I do think that Labour will be far more open to a border poll than any Tory government, beholding in some small way to the DUP. And I even heard Peter Robinson might be back instead of Jeffrey.
Well, it's going to be a time of fascinating change. It's
Politics
going to be very
has been
interesting.
very dormant for the last 4 years. You could safely not pay attention, but when you come back to it, it's like opinion polls. Things are never in the same place. They have moved very considerably. My feeling is that after the last election, when you have a January-February election, which is what the maximum point is, the January blues, the post-Christmas expenditure credit card difficulties, the bad weather, the incumbent gets blamed. Whereas in November, the feeling is, well, the winter wasn't as bad as we thought. Christmas is coming. The things are not too bad. And there's an air of jollification. And I think that will tempt Leo, at least, as his sort of parting shot, to hold an earlier rather than later election. So I'm looking at Udaros local and European elections in June. I'm looking at Sinn Féin, who did, I can bring you to a guy called Johnny Mythen in Wexford. He lost his council seat in 2019, but 600 votes in a place called Dowler at the ballot. A year later, he got over 18,000 votes in the general election. Same guy. So something viral happened, and that was unsated with what happened subsequently. So what I'm saying is that Sinn Féin got 9% of the vote in the local and European elections. So they're going to get such momentum from having they could treble their seats in that. And what a kickstart. It'll give them new candidates, extra candidates. It'll give them such a feel-good factor. It'll be like Obama, change you can believe in. It becomes unstoppable. So I see that as the first thing we've got to focus on. And then I see, the demand will be, let the people speak and have a new Dáil and all that kind of thing. I think Leo will go for a November election. But I actually think once we hit February, all parties will be in campaign mode, which they haven't been. They've been in governmental mode, policy mode, housing mode. I see that we'll be moving to crude populism, promises, giveaways, all the good stuff that you love, Eddie, will be coming, like a blockbuster series.
It is. Yeah, it feeds into the whole economic and social thing so interestingly. But can I ask you this question, right? When you take your pragmatic examination of what's going on, I mean, that must be happening at senior level in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil as well, and Labour Party. They must know this is the way it's going to be, and all that's uncertain is the speed at which they're going to hit the iceberg.
And this is actually cause and effect insofar as that people, the big influx of Fine Gael TDs came in 2011, when the government imploded, Brian Cowen's government and so on, and Fianna Fáil went down to 19 seats. Those people now, look, when I went into politics at 21 and said I was going to leave in my 40s, shock horror, I announced I was retiring from politics 41. That has actually become the norm now. You look at Brian Hayes, you look at Michael Darts, you look at people who go into so many different careers, both in employment, lobbyists, or whatever it might be, and Tom Parlin would be another, and so on. The fact of the matter is, politics is not a bad leverage to go and platform to go into another career. I found that, even to go into media, and even though the media is broke now. But the point about it is this: that and fragmented. That actually people are looking at their time in politics, their time in the sun. Whereas before, when I went into politics in 1981, into the Dáil, it was a career for life, and your son or daughter took over the seat. It was a dynasty. There was nepotism. That's all changed now. It's seen as you do your bit, and you can do it in your 30s or 40s, like Leo or Simon Harris, or you do it having had another career. And so, therefore, I would say that we're moving to a period where more than a third and up to 40% of the Dáil will change each time it goes 4 or 5 years. And there will be huge change in personnel. But the cause and effect specifically is a lot of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil people are saying, you know what, we're getting abuse. I've got a pension entitlement. I'm going to head for the hills and look at what else I can do with my life. And they're doing that with an acceptance rather than running away. And they're looking at it. And so therefore, that discussion about the pace of hitting the iceberg is some, didn't we do well to get this long out of it? It's the sort of feeling I'm hearing.
Yeah, it must be affecting morale. But can I just add one last question, Ivan, because you kind of opened it up there. The state of media, mainstream media, RTE now looking for bailout from the state, having done the state's bidding during the pandemic, much to the horror of a lot of people looking in on basic scientific mistakes, etc. Without even getting into that discussion, it's quite clear that there's something of a crisis in journalism and media. And how does that feed in then to, if you take the under 40s, and if the legacy media is basically getting enfeebled, where does how does society generate a sense of itself through a fragmented media platform?
This is all about economics in the first instance. 83% of people now get their news on apps, and they're not behind a paywall. They can get all who's died, who's sacked, what natural disaster happened. They can get all that without paying for it. They don't watch the 6 or 9 o'clock news. They don't buy a newspaper. It's over. Coupled with that, then 71% and rising of all advertising is digital, and that can be Google searches, not just the websites of independent.ie or the Irish Times or whatever. It's over. They have no money. Poor Virgin getting no subsidy. I see Virgin Media lost 6 million last year, and they've done nothing only the last 2 years. Cut costs. The fact of the matter is, it's over for RTE because it's become such a fragmented market. There's such an intergenerational shift in the way people consume news. RTE is now a heritage audience. And anything they watch, people watch it for free on the fair, and at a time of their choosing. So this all means that RTE's finances are just unsustainable, and selling Montrose actually only scratches the surface of it. They can lose between 30 and 50 million a year. This was before people decided they didn't want to pay the license. So now you're talking north of 60 million a year. I actually think that the Backhurst and the authority don't get it. Like, this is nothing to do with corporate governance, with oversight. It's nothing to do with oversight. It's actually to do with plain economics. You're running an organisation of 340 million. There ain't going to be either public or private or subscription revenue. If they went on a subscription model, they wouldn't get the money. Their advertising is going to go down. So the fact of the matter is, it cannot sustain 1,800 people. And, it just is a joke to me that the smart people are so insulated in a bubble that they cannot see. And I don't wish them ill. There's a lot of people that worked with me in News Talk and Virgin and TV3. All their goal in life was to get into RTE, and they have succeeded in that, and good luck to them. But their staffing levels, their manning levels, like, there's some programs, there's over 50 people working on them. It's just unsustainable. And you know what? The longer they delay biting that bullet, it's going to be like Aer Lingus. And, I saw a situation that people said was a national flag carrier or an island economy. It could not be changed. And I saw people physically lifted off the tarmac for Team Aer Lingus and Aer Lingus, whether it's cabin crews or pilots or engineers, and it's now just another carrier. And RTE is heading that direction. And you know what? There's no one wants to engage with that. Politicians want short-term band-aid solutions. They don't want flack from RTE. RTE, there just is no realization of how difficult the economic tsunami heading their way is.
Well, that's very interesting, because that's like a little microcosm of what a Sinn Féin-led Fianna Fáil coalition would have to deal with. I mean, the ideology of, we must have a state response here, like the state must step in.
Sorry, let's be clear, Eddie. They're not going to ask the revenue commissioners to collect a household charge of 150 yo-yos after what happened with water rates, and that's where the thing hits the ground. And so therefore, what will happen is they're going to say, actually, this is your problem, RTE, it's not our problem. And RTE are then going to have to reconstruct itself, deconstruct itself and reconstruct itself. That's right. Like watching EastEnders, so many nights a week, that's simultaneously on a BBC. How is that public service broadcast?
I agree. But like that, but that's the very essence of it, really. What we've been discussing, that ultimately, economics, market forces, pragmatism has to rule. You can have all the ideology in the world, but if the bloody thing isn't working, it just isn't
and if
working.
it's not sustainable financially, that's it. And it's just a case of how long the illusion can prevail. But I mean, it will be interesting, because there's no doubt Sinn Féin would be of a public sector ethos, public sector housing, public sector broadcasting, as opposed to public service. And the fact of the matter is, will there be disappointed people once Sinn Féin get into government? Eddie, dear boy, it was ever nice.
Well, if you've enjoyed Counterpoint, please subscribe by clicking the button below. See you next time.